What is up, ladies and gents? This is George Bean, and since this year is 2019 is supposed to be the 65th anniversary of Godzilla, I thought it would be really cool if I did a review for his very first debut film. That, of course, being the 1954 Japanese monster film Godzilla, or Gojira in Japanese, which was directed by Ishiro Honda, written by Honda and Takayo Murata from a story by Shigeru Kayama, and produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka. It was the very first installment in what would end up becoming a 32 film franchise that would span across 65 years and would turn its title monster Godzilla into a massively popular cultural icon around the world. Go- Gojira was released in Japan on November the 3rd of 1954, and it grossed 183 million yen during its initial theatrical run. But surprisingly, the film was initially panned in Japan for tapping into the nuclear taboo and for being a special effects movie, something which was looked down in Japan at the time. Nevertheless, the film was a huge success and had practically opened the gates for later Japanese media products to spread over the globe. It became so popular that it had started the franchise that we now know today, and Godzilla himself would end up becoming one of Japan's most lovable icons and their mascot, and overall the most popular movie monster in pop culture history, to the point where in 2004, Godzilla was given a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame, and in 2015, Tokyo's Shinjuku Award had even named him as their special resident and tourism ambassador. The plot: when a series of ships begin disappearing out at sea, raises concerns back in Japan. Investigations lead them to realize that a giant prehistoric monster had been disrupted from its deep-sea natural habitat by nuclear weapons testings. And when the creature begins attacking coastal towns, the Japanese government tries to do what it can to stop the rampaging creature from destroying Japan's way of life. In how this film had came to be, it was in 1954 when Toho Studios producer Tomoyuki Tanaka was on a flight back to Japan after an unsuccessful co-production deal with the Philippines on an unrelated film. During his flight, Tanaka had looked down at the Pacific Ocean below and wondered what might have been down there within the deep waters. This idea would drive him in attempting to produce a giant monster movie, but one that would address the issues of nuclear weapons, inspired by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, something which was not allowed in post-war Japan when it was then under US occupation from 1945 until 1952. Immediately, Tanaka had then written an outline under the working title The Giant Monster from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and after having recruited special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya to do the film's effects, Tanaka had successfully pitched the project to Toho and given the green light. And when crafting the script, they had also drawn heavy inspiration from the American monster film The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was released the year prior and had also featured the premise of an ancient reptilian creature being inadvertently awakened by an atomic bomb testing and terrorizing a city. One real-life incident that they would also take heavy inspiration from was the Daigo Fukuryu Maru incident, which had happened on March 1st of 1954, when a Japanese fishing boat called the Daigo Fukuryu Maru, or the Lucky Dragon Number 5, had ended up in the danger zone of a hydrogen bomb test called Castle Bravo. The Castle Bravo bomb was the most powerful bomb ever detonated by the US, and it the bomb detonated in the Bikini Atoll and had far exceeded what the scientists had initially predicted by 2.5 times. And this, combined with the changes in weather patterns, blew the nuclear fallout far beyond the danger zone. Within hours, the Lucky Dragon crew had completely been engulfed in the ashes of the radioactive fallout, or as the fishermen had called it, the Shinohai, or Death Ash. Once we're arriving back home in Japan, the crew was suffering badly from radiation sickness. One had ultimately died 7 months later, in October. The incident had ended up sparking a huge anti-nuclear movement that would affect the nuclear arms race. But back to the scripting process, Tanaka had hired sci-fi writer Shigeru Kayama to write the story. Written in 11 days and only 50 pages long, Kayama's treatment, at the time entitled Project G, had actually depicted the character, the Dr. Yamane, as an antagonist, an actual mad scientist who desires to keep the monster alive to study it. And for the monster, at the time it was being referred to as G for giant, as they were trying to come up with a name for it. And in the script, the monster was actually going to be revealed during the typhoon scene on Odo Island, when he was to be shown attacking a lighthouse, much like in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But when director Ishiro Honda came on board, he chose to further hold back the monster's reveal until later when Dr. Yamane is investigating on Odo Island. And when Kayama was writing the script, he was told by Tanaka that the monster was to be a cross between a whale and a gorilla. But one huge major trivia fact I really need to mention is how Godzilla had been first given his name. As it should be noted, again, his original Japanese name is Gojira, but did you know that the word is actually a conjoining of two Japanese words for gorilla and whale? For gorilla, it's pronounced as Gorira, and for whale, it's pronounced Kujira. So they took the go part and conjoined it with the Jira part, and that had became Gojira. And as for the English name Godzilla, that was actually coined by Toho themselves for the film's English releases. But one other as for how Godzilla would end up looking how he became, there were many designs, various different designs considered. He was even considered being depicted as a giant octopus, and another where they even considered having his head being shaped like a mushroom, like the mushroom clouds. But those were rejected, and so finally, they had ultimately decided to go for a more dinosaur-inspired creature, taking inspiration from the body and head of a T-Rex, the dorsal fins of a Stegosaurus, and the arms of an iguanodon. As it should be noted again, it's that Godzilla was actually initially created as, not as just as a metaphor for nuclear weapons in general, but he was meant to be the atom bomb itself, the living embodiment of it. And the destruction he brings to Japan in this film was intended by Ishiro Honda to mirror the destruction Japan experienced from the atomic bombings. Honda himself had stated, "If Godzilla had been a dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed by just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the characteristics of an atomic bomb and applied them to Godzilla." Tomoyuki Tanaka had also stated, The theme of the film, from the beginning, was the terror of the bomb. Mankind had created the bomb, and now nature was going to take revenge on mankind. Godzilla is the son of the atomic bomb. He is a nightmare created by the darkness of the human soul. He is the sacred beast of the apocalypse. Godzilla's nuclear roots had become a huge important part of the character in the 60 years since its inception, and it's a fact that is still retained even in the most recent films in the series, including the 2014 American reboot, Godzilla 2014, and even Shin Godzilla, both of which had put their own fresh spins on the backstory, but had still never forgotten nor brushed aside that fact at all. And speaking of drawing inspiration, in a way, as for Godzilla's thunderous stomping we hear, I actually strongly believe that its footsteps were also meant to represent exploding bombs closing in. I believe this because it is something which Japan had also experienced during World War II, when he was being firebombed. Now, in terms of the special effects used, they had originally considered using stop-motion effects, much like what Ray Harryhausen did on 20,000 Fathoms, in addition to the 1933 film King Kong, of which Tsuburaya was a huge fan of. However, they were unable to go with stop-motion as they realized that it would have been very expensive, and it apparently would have taken at least 7 years to finish it. So Tsuburaya had instead developed what he would refer to as suitmation, in which the Godzilla scenes would be filmed using a man dressed in a monster suit, walking among a scale model of the Tokyo city. And now I'm sure most of y'all think that it must have been fun to dress up as Godzilla and walk around in a small-scale model city toppling down buildings. But on this film, it was not fun for Haruo Nakajima. The suit was a nightmare to deal with. It had weighed 220 pounds, and it would also become very hot inside it, to the point where he had actually passed out from heat exhaustion several times during filming, and he had to wear it for only a few minutes at a time. And by the end of it, he had actually lost 20 pounds from working in that suit. Nakajima would continue to play as Godzilla until retiring in 1972 after finishing working on Godzilla vs. Gigan. And interestingly enough, he had also played Rodan in his first film in 1956, a monster that has now been featured in this year's Godzilla King of the Monsters. And now the movie had attracted the attention of an American producer when it was being screened at an LA cinema, and so he had decided on an idea to adapt it for an American audience, which had meant filming new scenes with Canadian actor named Raymond Burr playing a reporter named Steve Martin. Yes, Steve Martin, but the real Steve Martin was hardly a baby at the time. I don't think he was even born then, so it was merely a coincidence. This Americanized version, titled Godzilla King of the Monsters, of course, was released in American theaters in 1956. And despite mixed reviews from critics, it did win over the American audiences. On the Criterion Collection edition for this film, you can also find the Americanized version on a bonus disc included, so you would get both versions of the movie for the price of one. And as for the original Japanese cut, nobody outside of Japan wouldn't be able to see that cut until 2004, shockingly enough. So that's something. So for the past 50 years, only people were able to see the movie based on the American version. And as for the franchise it would end up spawning, as the series progressed into the 1970s, Godzilla began to be shown in an a increasingly heroic light and even became a protagonist. But come the 1980s, and Toho would reboot the series with Godzilla 1984, which would bring the monster back to his destructive antagonistic roots. But he would still be featured as the hero as the series continues to progress even into the 2010s. And then when they would reboot the series once again in 2016 with Shin Godzilla, a film that would be seen by some as being a contemporary remake of the 1954 film, essentially taking the bare bones plot and nuclear themes and updating them into the post 311 Japan. In that film, direct inspiration is drawn from the 311 Triple Disaster, which was one of the most crippling and deadly natural disasters to have ever hit Japan in recent memory. So I will say now, once again, I am a huge Godzilla fan. Ever since I was a kid, after seeing, unfortunately, the 1998 version by Roland Emmerich. But that movie had introduced me to Godzilla, and since then I have became a big fan. And so, with that said, I really do enjoy this film a lot, given how it is the very first film to introduce Godzilla, the movie that would make him the global cultural icon he is now today. I hadn't had the chance to watch this film until 2014, when I saw the legendary reboot, and I finally got to watch it, and was astounded by how good this film really was. It does amaze me to think that this little film, which has an honestly depressing tone to it, would spawn a franchise that would still be going 65 years to this day, and even single-handedly popularized the kaiju film genre. What I love most about this film is how it depicts its monster Godzilla. In the film, you get the sense that he is not just an animal who is mostly looking for food or territory, but, but is more of a destructive force of nature that ruthlessly responds to man's hubris into nuclear power. He is Mother Nature's way of striking back at mankind for poisoning her. In pertaining to Godzilla's method of walking slowly, in my opinion, I kind of see that as him being similar to a tornado or a hurricane, something which moves slowly across wherever it goes while also destroying everything in its path. What I what I believe also makes Godzilla the most memorable movie monster is the fact that he is practically invincible to human weaponry. No matter what kind of weapons the humans' military throws at him, nothing ever hurts him, let alone kill him. The only thing that actually kills him in this film is Dr. Zarazawa's oxygen destroyer, a device that could potentially be much more destructive than the atom bomb alone. What also makes this film good is how it spends its first act building up the suspense and mystery of Godzilla before it ever actually reveals him. This element of building up suspense by hiding the monster is something that Steven Spielberg would later apply in his film Jaws. And and it was also even similarly done in Godzilla 2014, in how it spent its first hour not showing Godzilla until an hour in. It was mainly because of this film. So there's your answer there. I love the one scene on Otto Island. It's when the natives are having trouble with their fishing, and they suspect it's Godzilla behind it. So they have this sort of sacrifice ritual to appease him, minus the actual sacrificing. Later that night, when the island is hit by a typhoon, they're suddenly awoken by the ground shaking and a thunderous stomping. It's that one quick scene where this family is awoken and the older man goes out to his front door to look outside. When he looks up, just as lightning flashes across the sky, and his face quickly turns into fear before he and his family are killed when their house is then destroyed. I really do love that shot of the man's face turning frightened. Imagine that. You go out by your front door during a big stormy night, and then all of a sudden, with the lightning flashing through the sky, you then see the silhouette of a gigantic monster coming towards you. That'd be fucking scary if you ask me. But I think what also makes this film memorable is the scene of Tokyo's destruction. The way it's shot, it makes it feel somewhat apocalyptic. Like as if Tokyo had just been through the apocalypse. I do love the shots of Tokyo completely engulfed in flames, and we see Godzilla in the background as he walks through the burning city. And it is when we also see the military try their damnedest to kill the monster, but their efforts prove to be futile as it does nothing to him. He just keeps going. It perfectly shows how seemingly unstoppable he really is. Something which had also become a staple mark of the character, which is that no human weapon on Earth can kill Godzilla. Something that the 1998 film had failed to retain. And it's also during the scene is when we get to see Godzilla's atomic breath in his very first film. Interestingly, they had used an aerosol that would spray out of an animatronic puppet of his head. Now, the breath does look a bit meh in this film. Doesn't have that laser-like look to it, but it does look more like an aerosol spray. But it is shown as being very destructive. The way it melts some steel reinforced electrical towers, and especially in how it instantly kills a group of people on the street. But this scene is very memorable for the miniature scale models used to create the city of Tokyo, and they do look spectacular on screen. Even for a film from 1954, its special effects do look absolutely spectacular. And yes, there are some moments where the military tanks and fighter jets look like toys, but I do still believe they're astounding, mainly for the hard work and effort that have been put into the minute detail into the models. But to also bring up is that when we reach the film's second half, after Godzilla has destroyed Tokyo and we see the aftermath, the film does start to become more darker and even a bit depressing when it features scenes of the survivors having to deal with the death and destruction they have been through. The like how some of the survivors are shown to be contaminated with radiation. And yes, this film also mentions how Godzilla had also left Tokyo doused in radiation. So even for those who had survived this rampage will likely die in the fallout. And to also mention, many people had complained about how little screen time Godzilla had in the 2014 film, which had amounted to 10 minutes of screen time. Here's an interesting thing. In the original film, he actually has 8 minutes and 44 seconds of screen time in this film. So, that's the film's director Gareth Edwards was attempting to do what this film and Jaws had done, which is giving the monster a small amount of screen time, especially in the build-up during the first act. And the human cast was really good as well. Takashi Shimura was outstanding as Dr. Kyohei Yamane. How do I pronounce these names? I suck at pronouncing, but he plays the character in a sympathetic way that you feel for him in his plight. And I also like how they chose not to depict Yamani as a straight up villain, as he was originally written to be. He does feel saddened that the army is trying to kill Godzilla. He wants to study and learn from the monster, but he knows very well the danger the monster poses and knows that it must be stopped. But the best actor probably has to be Akihiko Hirata as Dr. Zerazawa. He doesn't play Zerazawa as like a mad scientist, but a mad scientist with a very sad and tragic side to him. He is obviously very horrified by what he has created, that being the oxygen destroyer. In a lot of ways, Zerazawa is actually very similar to Robert Oppenheimer, the nuclear physicist who became involved in heading in the Manhattan Project, which would create the first atomic bomb, and a man who would live out the rest of his life haunted by what his scientific discoveries were turned into. And finally, one person I had yet to mention has to be its composer, Akira Ifukube. I know, Ifukube. Who had created a memorable score for this film, and a theme for Godzilla that would still be used even in the latest films. Even Michael Giacchino paid homage to this score when he scored the 2008 monster film Cloverfield, which I also rather enjoy. But what is really interesting is that Akira Ifukube was the one who had created Godzilla's trademark roar. He did so by taking a rubber glove coated with resin and rubbing it up and down on the strings of a contrabass or double bass and reverberating the recorded sound. Isn't that something cool right there? Ifukube would continue scoring the Godzilla films until 1995 with Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, after which he would retire. But in conclusion here, Godzilla or Gojira is still a spectacular monster movie to watch. What makes it stand out from the other 1950s giant monster movies is that this film is actually has depth in it, and a dark controversial allegory addressing the issues of the atomic bomb. And also, it is a movie that has been to be seen by anybody who is a fan of Godzilla, or even a fan of monster movies in general. Gojira is a film that you must see. The man who deserves huge recognition is the producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, as he was the one who had created Godzilla. It was his baby, and it was he who had shaped Godzilla into what we now know him by. Another filmmaker who also deserves recognition has to be director Ishiro Honda, as he gave the film depth, and he applied to the film the horrifying things he had witnessed during his time as a military officer in the Second World War. And his direction in mirroring the atomic bomb destruction is a commemorable thing for him to do, as it was something these people had actually had to live through. This film was very obviously hit very hit very hard at home for those who witnessed that destruction, and was made by people who were survivors of it. They had taken their deep feelings and applied them into the film, and that shows here. And to give y'all a heads up, once is if you plan to get this film on DVD, I strongly advise you to get the edition from the Criterion collection, as they had done a masterfully wonderful job remastering the film for home video quality. And not only that, but you also get the American version with Raymond Burr included on it. So you get both versions for the price of one. So overall, Gojira 1954 is being given a well-deserved 9.5 stars out of 10, because it is certainly one of the very best giant monster movies out there, and one that would end up spawning a franchise starring its monster that would last for the next 65 years to this very day. I would definitely highly recommend Godzilla or Gojira from 1954. This is definitely the giant monster movie for all, and one that will leave a lasting impression. So thank you for watching, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed the video, and tell me, what do you think of Godzilla 1954? Let me know what you think of it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and until then, I will see you all next time. Peace!